On this episode of Between Two Beers, we talk to Des Buckingham. Shay, who is Des Buckingham?
Well, he's New Zealand football's men's coach of the year, but he's actually the assistant coach at Melbourne City. He spent over half his lifetime as a coach, starting off in Oxford before winging his way to Aotearoa. We worked for football federations as a development manager and then eventually the Wellington Phoenix. He went back to the UK to take up a role with Premier League club Stoke before Andreas Haraf lured him back to New Zealand football as the head coach of the under-20s and assistant coach of the All Whites. His under-20s performed admirably in Poland, and then he answered an SOS to come back to New Zealand and take hold of New Zealand's Olympic program. He qualified the team for Tokyo, but then COVID hit, and he now resides in Melbourne. Des is a close friend of mine, and we still keep in touch.
This was the first time Des has spoken to any media since getting axed from his role as Olympics coach during the raft of redundancies New Zealand football made during the first COVID outbreak in April. We talked about his reflections on losing his job and his thoughts about New Zealand football and if he'll ever return, success and heartbreak at the Under-20 World Cup in Poland, how he used Sarpreet Singh's acting skills to improve team culture, what high-performance coaching really teaches you, and he answers your questions from social media. Des is a pretty switched-on guy, thoughtful, precise, and with a huge future ahead of him. This was a great long-form chat that allowed us to get into a ton of deep, detailed anecdotes and experiences. This podcast was sponsored by Craft Bar, our favourite place to dine in Hamilton. Craft are sponsoring a number of episodes and have been supplying us with delicious Swedish beers to enjoy during the show. Craft have a range of 15 different beers in-house, and their crispy pork belly is unmatched across the Waikato. If you're in Hamilton, make sure you show them your support. Mention this episode's secret phrase, Sarpreet Singh, and you're entitled to $20 off any tab over 100, valid for 1 week after the episode is published. Check out our brand new website at betweentwobeers.com, where you can find show notes, photos, YouTube clips, and links to Spotify and Apple Podcasts for every episode. If you like what we're doing and want to support the show, there are also links on our site to our Patreon page. A huge thanks to those who have already shown their support. Enjoy the ep. Des Buckingham, welcome to Between Two Beers.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's an honour to have you along. Recently won the New Zealand Men's Coach of the Year and the Under-20 won the Team of the Year at the New Zealand Football Awards. Have I got that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, last week.
Well, congratulations. Great to have someone of such high pedigree on the show. Shay, tonight we're on the Beerbliotek Hip Hops, number 49, 6% IPAs.
Yeah, a lot easier for you to pronounce this week.
It is. Yeah, we spoke with our sponsor, and he said he was loving the fact we were butchering the names and was going to send it to all the breweries to have a laugh. But I think we nailed that one.
Beerbliotek Hip Hops.
Craft, you've done it again. Right, let's climb into it. Shay, how do you know Des Buckingham?
I'd like to say, and I'm sure Des will back this up, that I'm his first friend in New Zealand, his first real friend in New Zealand. So we met in 2014 in the Sport Waikato office. We'd been spoken to independently by Owen Prosser, who you know as well, Stephen. I left New Zealand football, moved back to Hamilton. Des had come from the UK, and he'd said to both of us, keep a lookout for Des and keep a lookout for Seamus. And we spent might have been a week, maybe less, Des. I don't know how many days it was, but we kind of were making eyes in the office at one another, almost trying to work out, is that the guy? I don't know if that's the guy. I don't want to go and talk to him. I'm not really sure. And then I think Des broke the ice first, and we had some beers together on a Friday night, appropriately, and the rest is history. Someone I hold very, very dear to my heart. We worked very closely over the last 2 years with the 20s and the 23s. And I haven't seen him for ages in person because of all this lockdown stuff. But really good to have him on. There's probably a lot of people that are looking forward to this episode. So, yeah, it's a pleasure. I would say I know him very, very well. So I'm able to interject tonight as need to clarify some facts. And I'm sure I'll be in the gun from Des as well. But this is your first time, Steve, I think, speaking to Des.
Yeah, it is. Yes, talking to Des for the first time. Obviously followed him closely from afar and It's rare that you get a character who sort of galvanizes the football community the way Des did, especially when he left, and perhaps the way he was treated and the way that all went down. So looking forward to getting into exactly what happened there and perhaps clarifying a few things for some people. But Shay, where are we starting tonight?
We'll hear from the man himself in a minute. We'll do what we normally do, and we'll just keep talking over the top. But we were together in Poland at the Under-20 World Cup last year. We'll start in the opening game. So we played Honduras, and fantastic performance. Like, we'll get into the detail of how we got to that point. But in about the 85th minute, I think it was, we were leading 4-0. And a FIFA official came up to me and said, "Oh, Mr. Martin, we don't have anyone available to do the post-match interview. Would you be okay to interview the coach after you've won the game?" And I went, "Oh, yeah, okay, I guess so. No, that shouldn't be a problem. That'll be fine." And I was shitting myself. So I went back to the bench and I sat down for a little bit, and then I picked my moment to get up, and I approached Des as he is on the sideline, and I sided up alongside him, and I leant in and I went, "Des, I'm going to need to do the post-match interview after we've won the game." And he's in the middle of coaching mode, so didn't really we'll let him speak in a minute, but kind of dismissed me. I was like, "Fuck, the game's still going. We'll worry about the fucking post-match afterwards," whatever it was. I might be taking liberties with his words. But I sort of said, "Look, my mind's gone blank, and all I can think about asking you is, who's your favorite member of staff?" And at that point, I think he smiled, and we might have been on the camera on the big screen. It went back on the live broadcast, and it kind of was, I guess that's a little insight into the relationship that we had as coach and team manager. But is that a reasonably accurate recollection of that moment of the game, Des?
You've nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. I think literally 30 seconds before I turned to the bench. So we were 4-0 up, and you talk about a dream start at a World Cup. 4-0 up, 5 minutes to go. You're actually starting to really enjoy the game. So starting to watch and enjoy it as a fan, maybe rather than a coach. And I turned to the bench, and we'd done a lot of work, which I'm sure we'll delve into. And I'd just spoken to the players that were on the bench, because we'd made our final substitute. So it meant that anyone that was on the bench had either come off or wasn't going to get on. And of course, the players are visibly excited. So I just reminded them about who we were and what we'd set out to achieve. And yes, the final whistle was probably about to go in 4 or 5 minutes time. And not to get carried away with a celebration, because yes, it's 4-0 and it turned out to be 5. But that's now expected. That's what we expect to now do at these events. We expect to come here. We expect to compete. We expect to win. I said, so enjoy the moment. Really enjoy the moment. And a lot of them had their families there. I said, so still celebrate it, but just be mindful of not racing on the field. So enjoy it in a slightly different way, like you belong here, because we do belong here. And yeah, 30 seconds later, Seamus saddles up beside me, and exactly what you've just said. Yeah, I've got no words for it.
Des Buckingham, welcome to Between Two Beers.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's an honour to have you along. Recently won the New Zealand Men's Coach of the Year, and the Under-20 won the Team of the Year at the New Zealand Football Awards. Have I got that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, last week.
Well, congratulations. Great to have someone of such high pedigree on the show. Shay, tonight we're on the Beerbliotek Hip Hops, number 49, 6% IPAs.
Yeah, a lot easier for you to pronounce this week.
It is. Yeah, we spoke with our sponsor, and he said he was loving the fact we were butchering the names and was going to send it to all the breweries to have a laugh. But I think we nailed that one.
Beerbliotek Hip Hops.
Craft, you've done it again. Right, let's climb into it. Shay, how do you know Des Buckingham?
I'd like to say, and I'm sure Des will back this up, that I'm his first friend in New Zealand, his first real friend in New Zealand. So we met in 2014 in the Sport Waikato office. We'd been spoken to independently by Owen Prosser, who you know as well, Stephen. I left New Zealand football, moved back to Hamilton. Des had come from the UK, and he'd said to both of us, keep a lookout for Des and keep a lookout for Seamus. And we spent might have been a week, maybe less, Des. I don't know how many days it was, but we kind of were making eyes in the office at one another, almost trying to work out, is that the guy? I don't know if that's the guy. I don't want to go and talk to him. I'm not really sure. And then I think Des broke the ice first, and we had some beers together on a Friday night, appropriately, and the rest is history. Someone I hold very, very dear to my heart. We worked very closely over the last 2 years with the 20s and the 23s. And I haven't seen him for ages in person because of all this lockdown stuff. But really good to have him on. There's probably a lot of people that are looking forward to this episode. So yeah, it's a pleasure. I would say I know him very, very well. So I'm able to interject tonight as need to clarify some facts, and I'm sure I'll be in the gun from Des as well. But this is your first time, Steve, I think, speaking to Des.
Yeah, it is. Yes, talking to Des for the first time. Obviously followed him closely from afar and watched. It's rare that you get a character who sort of galvanizes the football community the way Des did, especially when he left, and perhaps the way he was treated and the way that all went down. So looking forward to getting into exactly what happened there and perhaps clarifying a few things for some people. But Shay, where are we starting tonight?
We'll hear from the man himself in a minute. We'll do what we normally do, and we'll just keep talking over the top. But we were together in Poland at the Under-20 World Cup last year. We'll start in the opening game. So we played Honduras, and fantastic performance. Like, we'll get into the detail of how we got to that point. But in about the 85th minute, I think it was, we were leading 4-0. And a FIFA official came up to me and said, "Oh, Mr. Martin, we don't have anyone available to do the post-match interview. Would you be okay to interview the coach after you've won the game?" And I went, "Oh, yeah, okay, I guess so. No, that shouldn't be a problem. That'll be fine." And I shit myself. So I went back to the bench and I sat down for a little bit, and then I picked my moment to get up, and I approached Des as he is on the sideline, and I sidled up alongside him, and I leant in and I went, Des, I'm going to need to do the post-match interview after we've won the game. And he's in the middle of coaching mode, so didn't really we'll let him speak in a minute, but kind of dismissed me. I was like, fuck, the game's still going. We'll worry about the fucking post-match afterwards, whatever it was. I might be taking liberties with his words. But I sort of said, look, my mind's gone blank, and all I can think about asking you is, who's your favorite member of staff? And at that point, I think he smiled, and we might have been on the camera on the big screen. It went back on the live broadcast, and it kind of was, I guess that's a little insight into the relationship that we had as coach and team manager. But is that a reasonably accurate recollection of that moment of the game, Des?
You've nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. I think literally 30 seconds before I turned to the bench. So we were 4-0 up, and you talk about a dream start at a World Cup. 4-0 up, 5 minutes to go. You're actually starting to really enjoy the game. So starting to watch and enjoy it as a fan, maybe rather than a coach. And I turned to the bench, and we'd done a lot of work, which I'm sure we'll delve into. And I'd just spoken to the players that were on the bench, because we'd made our final substitute. So it meant that anyone that was on the bench had either come off or wasn't going to get on. And of course, the players are visibly excited. So I just reminded them about who we were and what we'd set out to achieve. And yes, the final whistle was probably about to go in 4 or 5 minutes time. And not to get carried away with a celebration, because yes, it's 4-0 and it turned out to be 5. But that's now expected. That's what we expect to now do at these events. We expect to come here. We expect to compete. We expect to win. I said, so enjoy the moment. Really enjoy the moment. And a lot of them had their families there. I said, so still celebrate it, but just be mindful of not racing on the field. So enjoy it in a slightly different way, like you belong here, because we do belong here. And yeah, 30 seconds later, Seamus saddles up beside me, and exactly what you've just said. Yeah, I've got no words for it. He kind of caught me, and we did. The screen got us for a brief moment, and we shared a smile and shared a laugh. That's been one of many over the last couple of years, as well as, of course, Mark Oates, who was sitting on the bench at the time. I can only describe Mark. He looked like he was working in a McDonald's drive-through with the headset that they'd given him. And I know that he'd been taking grief for the final 5 minutes of the game from Chris James and Adrian Harvey and Valeria, who were the analysis up in the stands. I think they were phoning through their takeaway orders for the last 5 minutes of that game as well. So, yeah, exactly as you described it, Seamus.
So let's as we've sort of said, we'll get into the detail, but let's fast forward a couple of weeks later, and different pitch, but same area, and we're watching a penalty shootout in the round of 16 game against Colombia. Talk us through your recollection of that that moment, and then maybe the aftermath. Because I've never watched the game back. I've never watched the penalty shootout back. I kind of don't really remember too much after the final whistle went, other than consoling people. But as a coach, how's that for you?
At the time, I thought that I would feel downbeat. I thought the world would come crashing down, because I truly believed that we were going to win the game before the game kicked off. And I think a lot of the players have said the same since. There was a real belief that we were able to not only win that game, but go deeper into that tournament on the back of the performances that we'd had. But as soon as, the rigmarole and the VAR retake, and I still haven't seen an image to suggest that there was a reason as to why that penalty should have been retaken. It was a real sense of proudness around what we'd actually achieved. And it was a real strange feeling at a very strange time, because you look around, and rightly so, it's a heartbreaking moment. It's a heartbreaking moment for many reasons. One, because of how well we'd actually played and the results that we'd achieved. It was heartbreaking because of the culture and the togetherness that group had formed with staff. And it was heartbreaking for the reason of the mannerism and the way we went out, because the game itself, what a wonderful game of football. And one that the longer it went on, we had chances where we should have won it. It's as simple as that. They had a big chance right at the end, but that was from our own set play. But a real sense of proudness. And I almost, I spoke to the media afterwards, and of course they wanted to speak about the penalty shootout. And I tried to turn their attention away from that moment, because I wanted people to recognize what had just happened. And it was how well we played, how well those players, we went 1-0 down. And when we equalized, it wasn't a case of jubilation and it's such a surprise to be back in the game. If you watch the goal, Elijah just picks the ball up and runs back to the center circle with everyone else to say, come on, then let's go. We're going to win this game. So it was a sense of, proudness that come across me. And that's kind of something that carried with me probably for the next 12 hours and the chaos that ensues post-World Cup exits. And same as you said, I didn't watch the game back for probably 2 months, because it was just very raw, especially in the mannerism and the way that we did exit. So, hugely difficult, but hugely proud moment, because of, I think, what we ended up doing and hopefully what we achieved, and then changed the mindset and the playing style.
Des, you said you wanted to get the message across, or people to appreciate how well your team did play, because they did play exceptionally well. Do you feel like New Zealand football got that message? Do you feel like the public saw that and really understood how well they did?
I think the public certainly did. I mean, I still, the week before I left New Zealand, I still got stopped in a restaurant by a person who firstly asked me if I was Des Buckingham. And that's always a dangerous question to answer, because you don't know what they want. And I said I was, and he stopped me and said, I just want to thank you for the way the under-20s played at that World Cup. And he's been one of many, when I've gone around the grounds, that have come up and spoke, not personally to me, but spoke about how proud and how good it was to see the players playing the way they did. So when I've got around the country, people have been quick to share that with me, which has been great. New Zealand football, I'd like to think so. Not only with the 20s, but obviously what happened post the 20s and the roll into the 23s with the Pacific Games gold medal and the Australia Games and then the Olympic qualification. So I'd like to think so. I mean, it's difficult to answer because, Seamus, it's like you're away in a bubble. We were away for 5 or 6 weeks. You don't speak to many people outside of that bubble. So you don't generally know the impact it either is or isn't having, and whether people are watching or they're not watching. So it's, you don't feel that impact generally until you do come back.
It is weird, those World Cup experiences, right? Because we lose the game, we go back to the hotel, and then my role kicks in as a team manager, and I'm getting flights organised, and people are going here, there, and everywhere. So for listeners' benefit, I think we left. The match was an evening match, penalty shootout. We got back to the hotel, I think, at 12. And I want to say we left the hotel the next morning to head back to New Zealand at 10 o'clock. I think 10 or 11 in the morning, we were on a bus to Warsaw. Des, you went to the UK. I didn't actually get back to New Zealand because I had a stand-up argument with Emirates Airlines at Warsaw International Airport, and I refused to board the plane because they were going to charge us €10,000 for excess luggage. So I ended up offloading 28 team bags, I think, and was left by myself with all the stuff. Des, you went to the UK, right? Was your 20s contract kind of coming to an end at that point, or how did that play out? And then how did you eventually come back again and lead the 23s?
Yeah, so my contract initially with New Zealand football, from the moment I arrived back for the second time, so from that February point when I took the 20s in the All Whites role, I was only as a contractor, so it wasn't a part-time position, it wasn't a full-time role. So I was only a contractor with New Zealand football, which meant I only actually got paid for the activities that we did. So a sort of monthly retainer that, financially wasn't enough to live on. So yeah, I did. I had the freedom, if you like, to go back or go where I needed to go. And the big thing for me, I hadn't seen my family, and being in Poland as close to the UK as it is, after spending 5 or 6 weeks with a close group of players, it was nice to go back and see families. So I headed back over there, and then it was Father's Day. I believe that's a Sunday.
That's good.
And yeah, I was out with I was obviously out with my dad and his wife, so my stepmom and my sister were having dinner in a restaurant, and my phone rang, and it was New Zealand football, who had informed me that they'd been having discussions with Fritz, and Fritz was likely to be stepping away from his All Whites role, and they would like me to get back to New Zealand to discuss for future employment or further employment with the organisation, because of course the Pacific Games was happening, I think 10 days, 2 weeks post Father's Day. So I changed my flight.
Who is they at this point? So Andy Martin had moved on. This is Andrew Pragnell, the CEO you're talking about?
Yeah, that's right. So the CEO at the time when I signed my 20s contract was Andy Martin, and the technical director was Andreas Haraf, and the phone call at that time, so before we kicked off for the World Cup, Andrew Pragnell was the CEO and Andrew Boyens was the technical director. Yeah. So I jumped on a plane, I moved my flight, I flew back early, and met with Andrew Pragnell and Andy Boyens on the Friday. As soon as I landed, Fritz actually resigned on that Friday, stepped away. And then I think it was Wednesday the following week, I was presented with a contract and ended up signing that contract the week after. So the Friday of that week, to take the 23s, which extended both my 23s. So I took my 23s contract through to the end of the Olympics, that's what my contract was worded as saying, through to the end of the Olympics, and also extended my All Whites assistant role through to that same time frame.
And I mean, we can speak candidly. We stepped into a mess, right? Like the Pacific Games was crazy. I think once you were confirmed, I think you confirmed on a Friday, right? And then over the weekend, we kind of did, again, I was the manager for that group. We did a reconciliation of the players that were available. And I think we had 12 players confirmed for a tournament which New Zealand football had entered. It was a senior event. It wasn't the Olympic qualifiers, but New Zealand football had made the decision to send the 23s as preparation for the Olympic qualifiers, which were later in the year. Now, through a combination of circumstance, a number of players made themselves unavailable. A number of players were injured, and you must have thought, what the hell have I stepped into, when we kind of mapped out what the squad looked like on a whiteboard and thought, there's a few gaps here.
Yeah, right, there was. And the interesting thing was, my contract as a contractor, I was only contracted with the 20s and the All Whites. So I never had really any involvement with the 23s up until that point. So when I did arrive back into New Zealand and I sat with you, Seamus, we had a list of 40 players which had been submitted. So it's a very similar process to going to the Olympics. You have to submit a long list. And as soon as you submit that list, you can only select players for that event from that list. So if they're not on it, they can't come, regardless. So what we actually found was, of those 40 players that had been put on that list by Fritz, only 12 of them were actually available a week out prior to leaving for that tournament.
12?
12, yeah, 12. And the squad size is 20. The squad size is 23.
What? How come so many players were unavailable?
Well, there was players on the list like Michael Valdes and some of the boys that had gone to the 20s World Cup who were already with professional clubs. And because it wasn't a recognised FIFA window, those clubs didn't have to release them. And most of those boys were back in pre-season at that point anyway. So there was a lot of that. There was quite a few injuries, if I recall. Seamus, there was quite a few unavailabilities through that. And then there was a couple of players that hadn't heard anything. So had either stayed overseas. We had quite a few in the States. We had even one guy that had come back to New Zealand to take part, but was waiting around to find some stuff out. So, yeah, I think it was on the Saturday. We actually only had 12 players to go to an event we were leaving for on the Wednesday of that coming week.
So what are you doing? You got 12 players a week out. What are you doing? Are you ringing the phones? Are you stressing out? Are you thinking about packing it in? What's going on?
No, I know it was going to be challenging from the moment I agreed to sign the contract, because we knew this event had been agreed to. We knew that we had to send a team, and I knew that on the Saturday we could only select from that 40-man list. So it's not like we tried to speak to NZOC to see if we could bring others in at that late stage, but they stuck to the same rules, and rightly so, within the same as the Olympic tournament. So it was phone calls, and the interesting thing, we ended up putting only a 19-man squad together instead of 23. And it was difficult enough that we were going to a senior international tournament. So all the other teams that are in Oceania were pretty much full strength and senior teams. We were taking an under 23 age group team. And the squad we ended up taking, not only did we take 19 instead of 23, but the average age of the group was 20 years old. So it was a very, very young team. And from the teams that went to the World Cup, to give you an example, the type of changes that we went through, there was only 2 players in Cam Brown and Dane Snell that actually were part of that first group for the 23s that went to the Pacific Games. So the other 17 players were either new players to the environment or had been part of previous camps but hadn't made selection for the major event. So we got 19 on the plane. And the good thing is, because a lot of them had been part of our journey instead of a cycle over probably an 18-month period by that point, we were very familiar with them. There'd been a lot of work that had gone in terms of them adding value to our playing style, our culture, our environment. I'd got around the country, spent time with these players in their own environments, with their clubs, in their federations. So there was already a connection with these players, and they deserve to be there. Don't get me wrong, anyone that gets selected to play for their country deserves to be there. And not only did they deserve to be there, the outcome, which was us we topped our group. So we won 3 and drew 1. We scored 20 goals and conceded 1, I think, in the group stage, which set us up for a gold medals finals match against reigning champions, New Caledonia. And it was pretty surreal. We went on to win the gold medal, which was the first time any New Zealand team had ever won a gold medal at the Pacific Games. So again, well, I'm sure we'll delve into the culture and sort of what was developed and how it was built. But that was a huge test of, firstly, what work had gone on, but also could all the stuff that we'd done with the 20s and build up to that 20s World Cup, was it real? Because if it had the solid foundations, we'd be able to transition it through into a new age group of 23s and the new players. And that was something that really stood us in good stead in that tournament in particular, because of so many different challenges, firstly before we left, and then secondly whilst we were in Samoa at that tournament.
So what's an example, Des, of the cultural stuff you're talking about that went with you from the 20s to the 23s?
Yeah, it's probably easier to talk about what we did with the 20s, because that's kind of where it started. So long story short, I'm currently still part of a high performance sport New Zealand CAP program. So it's a coach accelerator program. So the idea is that, and this is their words, not mine, that it's to grow and develop New Zealand's coaches to become world class. And what they do is they select a group of coaches, anywhere between 6 and 12, I think it has been, each year, and they're across multiple sports. So I've been selected onto that. And in my first year we went, and there was a guy called Christian Penny who headed up this program and took over from Alex McKenzie. Alex had built the program over 10 years, and it's had people like Steve Hansen go through it. And so it's a very highly established course. But Christian Penny had come in, and Christian's background was in a lot of indigenous practices and Maori practices, I suppose you could probably call them. And when I went there, I felt like a kid at school, similar to my first day at training on Monday here in Melbourne, where I didn't know anybody. And it was a real strange feeling, because we knew that the caliber and quality, hopefully, of the people first was high, but it was very difficult to start trying to strike up some relationships where you didn't actually have any real connection with these people. And what Christian did throughout that whole week was take us through an approach which is very similar to when you go on and you're invited onto a marae. And we kind of went through that process throughout that week. And at the time, I didn't realize actually what it was and what we were undertaking. All I can describe to you was, after the 4 or 5 days that we'd actually spent together as a new group, I got back on the drive back to the airport to get back onto the plane to come back to Auckland. If you'd have asked anybody else how long we'd known each other as a group of 11 coaches, you wouldn't have said 5 days. You'd have probably said years, because the conversations that were now taking place were so deep. They weren't surface level. We were talking to each other, and we knew each other in far greater detail, not just around sport, but as people. And that process, when I reflected back on it, was a direct result of the practices, I suppose, that we'd gone through during that week. So what I did, I spoke to Christian and I said, look, we've got one more camp coming up before we go to the 20s World Cup. And I think we spoke around, I think culture is a word that's loosely chucked around. And I said, I think there's real benefits, and we could have some real impact here, because we've got 21 players coming from 9 different environments to form a World Cup squad. And generally, we only know each other as players, and not necessarily as people. And I said, I think if we can try and replicate something that I was exposed, what we did with me, if we can do that, I think we'll create greater purpose than self. I think we'll create real strong and true unique connections. I think it will give deeper meaning to us as individuals, but also as the group. And the beauty of it, it's unique to New Zealand, and no other country can replicate it. So it ties us back into being, so even though we're overseas, it actually ties us back into New Zealand. So to give you an example, Christian come in the first week, and we said we didn't know what it was going to look like, but we tried to integrate these types of practices in with our football, so it wasn't standoffish and standalone. So players turn up on a Monday for a camp, and they leave on a Friday. And generally, when they turn up, it's excitement and high fives, and then we go out into the pitch, and it's high energy, but generally the session's not very good because of the excitement. So Christian spoke around doing a whakatau, so actually a formal kind of welcome. And actually, the slogan that he'd come up with me was "Go slow to go fast." So actually slow people down. So similar to that approach when you enter into Marae, actually go for some food, be welcomed in, and then go for some food and relax and catch up with people that way before you go out and train. And that was sort of the initial stage of that. So we did, and Christian led that. In the evening, we'd already prepared the players that were coming into camp. We were going to hold our own pepiha, and the pepiha was just a symbol of players sharing a bit more about themselves. And the idea was to try and create these common connections and common links between us as people to the group. So to give you an example, the players were asked 2 very simple questions. The first was, where are you from, and what does home look like to you? And talk about the first time you fell in love with football. And we did. The first evening, those players turned up prepared for that, and they stood and they spoke for as long or as little as they wanted to. and they shared a little bit about themselves. And the idea was that around the room, we were looking for those common connections. So if you were from Napier, or you were from Wellington or Dunedin, or you had a brother or sister who was 10 years old, or so Max Matter was my connection early on. Max has got a brother who's 10 years younger than him. So have I. So it just give us some really surface level further connections to go and actually engage with these people on a deeper scale. And Shay, feel free to jump in here, because that initial evening for me, what I found was we had a group of 28 young men in and amongst a staff group, and I won't call it a vulnerable environment, but to get young men opening up and speaking about some of this stuff, and it's especially at quite an important time. I don't think young men do that. And what this environment did, what I found was, as we went round our circle, people become more willing to open up and share more about them as people, and especially around their family. And some of the stuff that was actually shared, one of the players actually said, he said, I haven't even spoken about this type of stuff to my closest friends. Can't explain why I'm saying it to you. I just feel comfortable enough to do that. And we had some really powerful and impactful things that were shared within that group. Actually, I won't say weighed on everybody else, but the idea was, now we see you, we know you as people and as players, and what's important to you is important to me. So we started to create that greater sense of others rather than self. Took around, when you go into marae, you go into someone's house or a whare, and we recognise we could never have our own whare, but the idea was the representation of what a whare was, and the importance and the that what it meant to families and people. So it had history, it had meaning, and our idea was, with these practices, creating our own identity, which is what we were trying to set out to do, both on the pitch and off of it. So when mum or dad flick the TV on at home, they could be proud of, we talk around in the New Zealand football curriculum, Kiwi strengths and having a superior team culture as part of playing style. And it was to try and create that identity that with people to watch, they could firstly be proud, but they could see it was a truly unique Kiwi way of doing things. And we did. I think that was what we ended up doing. We created an identity, but it was based around that whare and what that represented. And that was both on and off the pitch. But
you talk about off the field, and I want to lift the lid a little bit about kind of some of the stuff that we did. Can you just share with our listeners the Sarpreet Singh exercise that you set up while we had a team meeting that I wasn't aware of?
Yeah, I can. So I think very often we touch upon surface level, either wording or statements. And I'll go back to the New Zealand football curriculum at the time when I first took over. I was really keen on delving deeper into what it defines as Kiwi strengths, because I do truly believe that there are Kiwi strengths, but what are they and what do they mean, and how do we use them? What do they look like? And same around superior team culture. And that's another statement used in that document. What is a superior team culture? What does it actually mean to be Kiwi and be overseas and represent your country? And we'd spent a week putting together a playing style and getting the involvement of players and agreement on what was going to be important to us in terms of measurements. So the scoreline is always going to be the external measurement, but what were going to be important internal measurements to us, because again, we had 21 players from 9 different environments, all with their own strong opinions on how the game should be played. So we got them to agree as a collective on how we would approach certain situations. And then it was a case of trying to test that. And the safest way I felt of doing that was doing that in the, not on the field, but off the field, but to make a point. Because what we'd done off the field, the players had come up with their targets and their goals for the tournament itself. And it was very player-led, very player-driven. They come up with their why, their what, and their how. So the why was why we are where we are. So we're in Poland. Why we're here? We wanted to reach the quarterfinals, and we wanted to create history. The what was how we were going to try and do that. So that included things around arriving into those knockout games fresh, arriving into those knockout games with no suspensions, no injuries. And then it was the how. How do we arrive at with no suspensions? And that was things around reporting your daily wellness, keeping hydrated, coming and asking questions if you're not sure. So those types of things. But the bigger one was around if players, we want players to self-manage, and they did, but they come up with their own sort of team rules, if you like. And as part of those team rules, there was things around no mobile phones in team meetings, everyone be at dinner on time, no flip-flops, all those sorts of things. And then they put themselves a small panel of people together that govern that, I suppose, and hold each other accountable to that. So on that list of rules that they'd come up with, and staff abide by this as well, because again, it's not players and staff, it's us as a collective. On that list was a rule around no mobile phones in team meetings or at dinner, because we want people to speak and engage with each other. And I said to the staff at lunchtime, a couple of days before we played Mexico, I said, we need to test this. We need to actually test these words that are on paper, because we'd done it for the playing style. We'd got the players to come up with this, and we got it on paper on how we wanted to play, in possession, out of possession. And then we had our how, what, and why with the rules. I said, no, we need to challenge this, because if this is true, it will work and it will stand up, and we'll hold each other accountable. And the safest way to do that was in the classroom. And so what we did, team meeting, I spoke to the staff at lunch and I said, if you see a player with his phone out in a team meeting shortly, ignore it, don't say anything. So players started to filter into the team meeting, and Sarpreet went to come in. I pulled up.
I'll just jump in, Des, because I wasn't at that lunch.
No, I didn't realise that at the time.
Yeah, so just for listeners, so Des has briefed all of the staff, but I haven't been at that lunch. So the rest of the staff are in on this, and I was away. I don't know what the fuck I was doing. I was doing something with a medical thing. So, and then the players come into the team meeting, and I'm in the team meeting as well.
Yeah. So I've started to present. So I asked Sarpreet to go and get his phone, which he did. He got it from his room, come back. And I said, look, all I want you to do as I'm presenting over the next 15 minutes is just pull your phone out and either pretend to send a text or just be seen to be on your phone and put it back in your pocket. I said, but be discreet, be discreet and keep doing it until somebody calls you out for it. And the way we'd set the room up was in a manner which he was going to be seen, regardless of where he sat. So he did, he come in, and within 2 minutes, he's pulled his phone out of his pocket. And I think it was Joe Bow and maybe Gianni either side of him. And they've seen it. And they've both looked at it, hit down at him texting, and then they've looked at me, and I've pretended not to see it. And then they've looked at the other staff. And nothing was said. Sarpreet put his phone back in his pocket, and then a couple of minutes pulled it out again and sent another text. So Sarpreet's pulled his phone out of his pocket, and Joe Bow and Gianni either side of him have seen the phone, looked at me, and then looked at the other staff, and we've ignored. He's put it back in his pocket. He's pulled it back out again in front of them. They again have seen it, haven't said anything. We then broke them into small separate groups of 7, so 3 sevens. He's pulled the phone out in a group of 7. So now he's got more people that have seen him do it. He's put it back in his pocket, still unchallenged. And then we've gone back into a full collective. And at this point, he's pulled his phone out. And now I'd go as far to say at least half the team have seen him do it. And at this point, from the back of the room where Seamus was sitting, Seamus shouts across the room, so interrupts the meeting and says, Des, sorry to interrupt you, but what's the rule around team phones in meetings? And I said, there aren't any phones in meetings, Seamus. Why? And he said, oh, no reason. And I was like, okay, fine. So that's a warning shot, if you like, to Sarpreet. But then it clocked that I hadn't actually had him in the meeting.
I was fucking headlocked. I was like, I can't believe this is happening, and no one's saying anything.
So then, what I didn't realise at the time, Sarpreet's then pulled his phone back out again, and he sent a message. But what I didn't realise at the time, he sent a message to Seamus saying, "What's your problem?"
Yeah, it was fun. Oh, it was so good.
So all you see then was Seamus, who clearly now isn't in on it, get up from the back of the room, storm forward, grab Sarpreet's phone off of him in front of everyone, and storm back and just sit down. And of course, then you have to address it. And I've said this before, but if Sarpreet, if football, if he chooses to change his career, acting's a wonderful thing that he could take up, because we had a little back and forth on what's going on, and were you on your phone? Yes, I was. Why? Oh, I don't know. So I ended up cutting the meeting short. And I stopped. I actually got myself angry because nobody had challenged him. It actually got that far. And the most important point that we made to the group there and then, I said to them, how many of you have seen him? So you've had your phone out clearly because people have said, how many of you in this room have seen him on his phone? And there was 2 hands, and fair play to Joe Bow and Gianni. I think it was like 2 hands went as far as their ears, so not fully up, but they admitted to seeing Sarpreet on his phone. And I said to them, I said, surely if you two have seen, others have seen. And I think we've generally got probably half the room slightly saying it. So then the most important question was, well, why haven't you said anything? And the answer that come back was, well, we thought he'd put it away. We thought he would put it away. So that was perfect because it allowed me to go straight back to the board. It allowed me to tear back the A1 sheets that they developed, and it touched back upon their behaviors. And what they put in there is no phones at team meetings. And I made the point to them, we've gone through this whole process over the last, whether it be 12 months, 18 months, but in particular the last 10 days together, where we've agreed on how we want to play, and we've agreed on how we want to approach this on and off the field. And these are the things that you guys have come up with. So we talked earlier around our fare and our identity. This is part of who we are and what we are. And if you can't hold each other accountable to something as simple as a mobile phone in a team meeting, what chance have we got on the pitch when we say we want to be a possession-based team and play out from the back? What are you going to do if someone sticks it long for the next 10, 15 minutes? I said, the whole thing's going to fall to pieces. So with that, the point was, we want, if we're going to have this thing created, it's our identity. It's us. We've built it. This is who we are. But we need to hold each other accountable to that. It's not you've done wrong, and it's not me having a go at you. It's, hey, this is who we are. This is us. That's not what we do here. So we left them. We didn't tell them we'd set that up. And I kept Sarpreet back at the end, and I asked him to keep it to himself. And it wasn't until the next morning where we shared that with the players. And I can honestly say, and Seamus, I don't know if you'd have said, the impact that had both on and off the field was huge. The training, the intensity of the training and the level of training really went through the roof for the final few days in preparation for Honduras. We were so true to our principles in terms of how we wanted to play. And then we didn't have to deal with anything off of the field, behavior-wise or otherwise, because players they managed themselves and were true to who they said they were going to be. And that was a real special moment, I think.
That's great. Is that a little bit that you picked up from the high performance training seminar, or is that something that you'd used for other teams?
Yeah, I can't claim that. That comes from Jay Carter. So Jay's an excellent golf coach in Waikato, down your way, actually. It was a story that he'd taken from rugby. He'd heard from rugby. So I said to him at the time, do you mind if I borrow that? Because I think that could have huge impact on what we wanted to achieve. And he was happy with that. So yeah, full credit to Jay for that. So Shay, I don't know if you want to jump in on some of that, because I've kind of waffled on a bit.
Yeah, no, I will. It was pretty powerful. Like Des sort of alludes to, you come to these camps and, I know Steve, he's a striker, and I know, so-and-so, he's a defender, whatever it is. And you don't really get to know people. And when you go on these tours, you go to some dark places sometimes because you're around the same group of people. It's a pretty limiting environment. And then to go back to your kind of original question, Steve, like when we went into Samoa, half of the group hadn't gone to Poland, but had been part of that process that Des is describing. So they were able to kind of there were strong connections already, so they were able to take that and almost carry the group through. And we went to some dark places in Samoa, which we can go into in a bit of detail later on. But those foundations kind of set the scene for, I guess, the next step on the journey, which was Fritz had left New Zealand. The All Whites coaching role was available. You're coming off some great form. New Zealand had put the best performance of an age group team at a World Cup, won a gold medal with a team that wasn't expected to go away to a senior tournament and under 23 and come back, and a result that had never happened before. And then the natural progression, I guess, is to put your hat in for the All Whites coach's role. As we all know, as it kind of transpired, you didn't get the role. But talk to us through kind of that period of time as well, because while you didn't get the All Whites role, you retained the 23s role, and then New Zealand later qualified for the Olympic Games. So it's a really hectic period of time, from post Poland to qualifying for the Olympics.
It was, Fritz left, and I think it was a 2-month period where that role was vacant. And yeah, I did. I put my hand up for it, and I felt I was well positioned for it based upon quite a few things. Firstly, I'd spent before I arrived into New Zealand. Firstly, I'd spent 10 years working in a professional environment. I was 29, working in the English Football League. 10 years working in youth development. I'd arrived into New Zealand and spent 2.5 years, first time, 3 years, 3 and a bit, firstly working in federations and understanding federations and the culture and the community. And then obviously taking on the Phoenix role, firstly as assistant coach and then head coach. And then I'd had the year or so at Stoke City working under 2 other Premier League managers. So on top of that success that we've been able to show at 20s and the Pacific Games in particular, I felt was no reason not to go for it, I suppose. And I see it as an opportunity to continue the work that we'd started from what was the under-19 championships that qualified us to the 20s World Cup, to the 20s World Cup, to the Pacific Games. So yeah, I did. I put my hand up and went in for it. And yeah, I didn't get it. Was called in. I think there was a few people interviewed and was asked to present, and I did. I presented for 45 minutes on stuff that they'd asked for, and then was then informed that I hadn't been successful for the role. So yeah, quite a busy time, and kind of went from there really.
Did you rate your chances of getting it? It became apparent that it looked like a 2-horse race. It was you and Danny. Did you get any sort of inkling? Were there any sort of feedback from anyone that you were more of a favourite than him, or he was more of a favourite than you in that run-up?
No, not that anyone had said to me. I mean, the one thing that was clear, they'd lowered the requirement coaching wise or qualification wise from what was a pro license at the time to an A license, and that obviously opened up doors to other people, and that's fine. But again, I can only answer on my behalf. I felt I'd done as much as I possibly could. I'd coached for 17 years now continually, and I'd like to think during that time frame I've shown across multiple areas that I'd hopefully be best positioned for that role, both my time overseas, but more so the 4 or 5 years as it was at that point, actually being in New Zealand. So I felt I'd done as much as I possibly could, and I felt that when I come out of the interview as well. And yeah, I mean, New Zealand football, well within their right to make obviously their own decisions, and they chose to go with Danny. But yeah, I was happy with, firstly, what I had done to put myself in the best position for it. And I was happy, there's only a 45-minute presentation, but I was happy with the way that went as well. So yeah, no kind of regrets, because the other way of doing it is if you don't go for it, you never know, and you can never then look at it and say, I wish I had. So yeah, that's kind of how it's worked out, which wasn't ideal for me. But again, that's the decision of the organisation. So we get on with things.
So once Danny was appointed as All Whites manager, what was the relationship like with you as under-23 coach and such a large crossover with the players?
Yeah, it was a strange time because we were preparing for 2 games against Australia. They're under-23. So we were in camp for a couple of days before jumping across to Sydney, and never got a chance to actually sit down and talk before we did that. So we went to Australia. We pretty much continued what we'd done with the under-20s, with the addition of new players. So the same playing style, we added layers to it. And I think anyone that watched those games, hopefully were able to see that. And we were actually disappointed to come away with 2 draws, whereas before I think we might have been delighted to get those results. So we certainly surprised the Australians in how we approached it. So it wasn't until we actually got back that I was able to sit with Danny. And when I did get back, we met, and he spoke about what he was looking for in his environment and the staff that he wanted to work with. And as a head coach, he wanted to work with people that he'd had in before. So unfortunately, that didn't feature myself. But what it did do is allow me time to really focus on our under-23s Olympic qualification to the Tokyo Olympics, which was coming up the month after.
So then bearing in mind you'd come back only 3 months earlier to pick up the under-23s coaching role, which then triggered an extension to your All Whites assistant coach's role. And then how disappointing was it post-qualifiers to not go on the All Whites tour when 2 other assistants get brought into that camp?
Yeah, I won't say it wasn't, because it certainly was. I thought I was willing to work in that environment and try and contribute to that, because I thought it could have had some real short and long-term success, both for the players and the team. But it wasn't meant to be. And again, it just allowed me now to really focus on that under-23s after qualifying, what was supposed to have been a 9-month lead into Tokyo. So it wasn't meant to be, but it did allow me to focus in on that.
We went away again. I was part of the management team. Went away to Fiji and put a pretty impressive performance together. I think it's the most dominant performance on the pitch from a New Zealand team, I think. And I've got experience. I can talk from an Oceania perspective, because I worked for Oceania football for a number of years as well. And there was almost a feeling sometimes that New Zealand maybe didn't appreciate or didn't contribute as much when they traveled to the islands. And I think we worked really hard. Well, I know we worked really hard as a group to try and rectify or try and improve that image. So not only did we win fans on the pitch, but off the pitch, I think we won a few friends as well.
No, I think so. You've already touched upon the fact we've gone to the islands, and when I say we what people see at the World Cup, we just continue to add to, both on the field and off the field. So we talk about this culture and this environment. There's so many deeper layers that during the time we had together at Pacific Games and Australia, and now at the Olympic qualifiers, you only need to speak to the players and see how they talk about what they've created, because it has very much been dug up and created. And I think that's the way it has huge impact, rather than top down and dropped onto people. There's been so many people, players, staff, community that have added and built from ground up that's had such a huge impact. And that for me was huge. And I think that was reflected in the feedback that we certainly got. We went to the New Zealand High Commission, and I can't remember who it was, Seamus, but they actually stood up and thanked the football for what we'd done. We hadn't even kicked a ball by that point in terms of how we'd approached and been approachable.
Yeah, it was that was at Pacific Games, I think. Listeners will kind of remember the previous Pacific Games tournament or competition in Papua New Guinea, where unfortunately New Zealand were removed from or disqualified for the ineligible player situation. So there was a little bit of kind of repairing of the relationship with the Olympic Committee around that. So yeah, we definitely mended a few bridges along the way, and then qualified quite successfully for the Olympics, which was and there's if you're football fans out there, if you look at it, there's quite an emotional moment at the end of that final, which is caught on camera, where Des hugs me in there. This episode isn't about me, but you were emotional at that final whistle, Des. It's a big thing, obviously, to qualify for an Olympics, and had the magnitude of that kind of hit you at that point?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. Even now, as you bring that back up, I've just gone tingly down my back. It was only the third time that New Zealand had ever qualified for a men's Olympic tournament. So there was only 36 players that had gone before this group that are now hopefully still going to go. And like I said, we went to the islands, and I've been in New Zealand for a long time, where there's been excuses made for playing maybe a style of football because it's the island, it's hot, it's whatever. What we did, we went to play football, and we played the same way, if not better, than what people see at the 20s World Cup in the islands, both firstly at the Pacific Games, but definitely at the Olympic qualifiers. And that for me was a huge pleasure to see, because it showed that we stuck true to our identity, stuck true to who we were, and the players believed in it. And it didn't matter where we went, who we played. It was about, this is who we are, this is what we do. And that was probably the biggest thing for me. And that final whistle, I'm not generally too much of an emotional person, but I remember saying to you, Shay, I think we embraced at the end, and Yeah, I think it was a longer embrace than we normally have, and generally they're normally good cuddles with you. You know, you like to hold on far too long to make it awkward. But yeah, I think we had to delay media because I did get pretty emotional, but that was for probably two reasons. Firstly, because of everything that we'd gone through to get to where we'd got up until that point. And again, I touched upon this proudness around how we had done that and what we had built. And the second thing, the truth behind it was, my under-23s contract that I'd signed said that if we didn't qualify for the Olympics, my job was gone, and because there was no further activity. So I'd have lost the job, and not only me, but all the staff that had been on this journey with us all the way through. We'd have all ended up disbanding and going our own separate ways. So by actually winning that final and doing it in the style and the manner which we did, not just the final, but the 5 games, for me, it was another opportunity over a 9-month period leading into Tokyo now, was to continue building and really adding layers to what had started 2.5 years earlier. So probably a culmination of a lot of things that kind of caught me. And then if anyone watches the OFC post-match interview with me, I think the first answer I have to catch myself 2 or 3 times. But yeah, that meant a lot. That meant a lot to me, more so because of what we'd done and how we'd done it as a collective.
So let's start building towards a fairly tricky time. Is COVID, the lockdown, the pandemic, which delays the game. Now, we had Emma Twigg on our podcast last week, who was approaching her 4th Olympic Games in the best shape of her life. And we talked about sort of seeing the news filter in from China and Italy and America. This thing's bad. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. It looked early doors like the Olympics would be postponed, but it took a while. Were you following the news very closely, and were you starting to get a picture? How early were you starting to get a picture that the Olympics were potentially going to be delayed or cancelled, and what it might look like for your working future?
Yeah, I'd obviously seen the news, but wasn't. I think it stayed in sort of Asia for a period of time. And to give you an idea, we actually travelled, and I say we, there was Andrew Pragno, Andy Boyens, Tom Samani, and myself. We travelled to Japan in February to go and check out the facilities that we'd agreed to stay in prior to the Olympic campaign. So we'd signed up with a city in Atsugi, who were going to look after us and host us for, I think, 10-day period before the Olympics actually started. So we were actually in Japan in, I think it was mid-February. There was no real talk of the Olympics being cancelled, even as, mid-February. I think they were cancelled late March. So there wasn't that much concern at that time. And I think we
were supposed to go to the draw in April.
Yeah.
So we had flights and everything booked, ready to go. Like everything, it was all systems go. And then it just kind of shit the bed.
It was within a sort of 10-day period where, of course, that draw was supposed to take place, and we were being sent through information that send through your flight requests. So as far as we were concerned, it was very much go as normal business wise. And then we got an email through to say the draw was now going to take place online because it had started to spread, and they didn't want to run the risk of spreading it further. And then we got notification through. And I think when people started to realize the severity and the impact it actually was having, the Olympic Committee made a decision to cancel it. But in terms of a lead-in, no, I mean, we were in Japan in February and still making plans to attend a draw in March. So there wasn't too much of a lead into it. It very much happened very quickly.
So, Des, help me out with the timeline. So COVID is happening, Olympics are postponed, and New Zealand football start terminating support staff contracts across all teams, 2 of which were your assistants, one being Hiroshi Miyazawa and the other Mark Oates. So it's around this time that media speculation starts that you may not take the team to Tokyo. And then the players write a letter to New Zealand football requesting that you stay on, which really speaks to the regard you were held within the playing group. And then a couple of weeks later, you were removed. So when did it become clear to you that perhaps your position was in jeopardy?
Yeah, it was a strange time for everybody, I'm sure. But the first formal sort of notification I got from New Zealand football was the second week of April. So just informing my contract wouldn't be extended beyond what it currently was, which was August 2020, just due to COVID and obviously the postponement of the the Olympics, and then for sort of a 10-day period post that, we had some meetings where we looked at ways, or I tried to present some ways that it could work, but unfortunately there wasn't a solution that could be found. And then I was, I think at the end of April, it was unfortunately made redundant from the role.
So just focusing on that letter, pretty unprecedented that a bunch of players get together and really feel it necessary to stress that they want this coach to stay. For you, was that a sort of representation of the cultural stuff we've talked about how close the bond was, and was that really powerful and meaningful to you?
Yeah, I struggle to put a lot of things from our environment and our culture into words, and I think when you listen back to the players talk on some of the podcasts that they've done away from this one, unfortunately, they also struggle. And when I spoke to High Performance Sport and presented, as I'm still doing, around our culture and how we linked it into performance, I still struggle to put it into words. And the guy that was on the board of High Performance actually said that's probably the best way of being able to describe it. Not by not describing it, not being able to word it, is it. And that's exactly the way I feel about that letter. Yeah, obviously you hear about people writing stuff to get rid of coaches, but for players to be brave enough, I suppose, to put themselves in that position where they've done what they've done, for me speaks volumes about what had been created over the 2.5 years. And we said we want players to be comfortable to be themselves and speak up if they have something to say, and they certainly showed that. They showed that there, and I think that will stand them in good stead, both now and in the future.
Yeah, I was fielding calls from players basically the whole time, sort of wanting to know what was happening, and it was this weird vacuum where it was sort of the speculation was playing out in the media, but there was kind of no confirmation either side, and then it just boom came, the confirmation came through. And I think, Andrew Vorman wrote a piece in Stuff, Steve. I don't know if you've got the quotes there that you can pull up on, but the whole fallout and the way it was handled, I think that was probably what shook people the most. You could understand, I guess, if you put a logical hat on, the Olympics had been postponed, you could see some logic in the decision, but just the manner in which it went about, I think, left a lot of people kind of reeling. Yeah, I will read that Vorman piece was very good, and I think it summed up well what was going on. So I'll just read a few parts. It says, what was inexcusable was how it was executed and presented to the playing group and the public by New Zealand football, from Chief Executive Andrew Pragnell on down. So New Zealand football framed its messaging around what was happening, which was Hay taking charge of the team, rather than what wasn't, which was Buckingham staying in charge despite the postponement of the Olympics, which is a typical approach, but one that grates. In its announcement, there was no mention of what Buckingham and co had achieved in their time with the organisation, just an unattributed thank you and a rote statement of empathy from Pragnell. Does that fairly reflect the way you felt it when you left?
So I don't think it's up to me to say how an organisation should operate. I can't control what happens, and I certainly couldn't there, but I can try and control how I respond. And that response was to reach out to players and just connect with them to explain things through, and then again connect with staff and the wider sort of New Zealand staff who reached out at that point. So that was important to me, and although disappointing, again that's a decision that was taken out of my hands.
I don't want to pick at the scab, because anyone that's listening can obviously tell that it's a difficult one to talk about. But how challenging was it for you personally? Like, put the professional stuff aside, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. People are sitting at home not able to interact with each other. What sort of support did you have to get through that? Because you're a human at the end of the day.
Yeah, we were in level 4 lockdown at the time, so I was in my apartment by myself. But again, what was really good was the amount of messages and phone calls that did come through. Firstly, players and staff, and then generally the community and people from within the organisation and elsewhere around the country. So that was a real, that really helped what was a very difficult time. It's a time where football isn't being played, so the opportunity to maybe jump back into another job is few and far between. So financially as well, that obviously has an impact. But yeah, a huge support network really kicked in, and that was hugely welcome at that time.
So just reflecting, Des, and I don't want to delve too long on this because I understand it's such a small part of your coaching career, but it's probably the part our audience are most interested in. But it certainly doesn't define everything you've done. And I know you probably don't want this episode to be all about you talking down on New Zealand football, or maybe you do, but I don't know. But looking back now, do you still have a relationship with New Zealand football? And how do you think of that saga now as part of your coaching journey?
Yeah, I've still got, I'd like to think, good relationship with most people at New Zealand football. It's the same as when I've left any organisation. You try and not burn bridges, and you try and keep those relationships as strong as you possibly can, because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. So I've certainly kept in contact with most of the people in the organisation, especially those that reached out. Even last week, to an extent, Tracy Brady, who was a star of that organisation, I sent her a bunch of flowers just to thank her for her time and support during my whole time at New Zealand football. So, yeah, I mean, I've got lots of good memories and relationships and formed through my time with the 20s and 23s and my role with the All Whites, and more so over the 6 years that I spent in New Zealand. So I take them away. Unfortunately, I have to take them away with me now. But again, such fond memories of my time in a wonderful country. And I truly do. I wish the staff and I wish the playing group and the organisation well in what they go to continue doing now, hopefully the Olympic Games, and across all the age group teams in the senior sides. And I really look forward to seeing how well they do kick on from here.
So was winning Coach of the Year kind of a nice little cherry on the top and a way to sign off that New Zealand football experience for you?
I think it was a nice reflection of the recognition, maybe of the work that we'd all done, not just me as a coach, but the staff that had been involved in putting everything together. Players, I think it was 79 players that contributed heavily towards what had been developed. And then the general community and everyone, when I went around the country, were able to add value to what they ended up seeing on the TV. And when I look back at historical moments, the 20s World Cup, not only did we look to change that playing style, I think we did. I'd like to think it's almost a blueprint there that can be followed and taken at both age group level and senior level. So, yeah, it's always nice to get recognition, but it's not recognition of me. I think it's recognition of a 2.5 year period that hopefully sets those age group teams and national teams up for success, both now and in the future. So that's what I'm really looking forward to seeing, unfortunately, from Australia at the moment.
It all feels a bit bittersweet. It's like New Zealand is crying out for quality coaches, and here we had one, and he did exceptionally well on the world stage. And then now we've lost him, and he's gone to the A-League, where you are now. But what's the New Zealand public to make of this? It seems like the overwhelming outpouring of support and emotion for you when you got made redundant was huge. It totally dominated my social media sphere. I imagine your support was probably quite overwhelming. But how do we feel about this? I mean, this just seems like a terrible thing for New Zealand football. We've lost a great coach who now maybe come back, but maybe not.
Yeah, I don't know. You're probably asking the wrong person for how people should feel. The one thing I will say is there's so many good people that are currently either involved and certainly not involved at the moment. And I look at people, and I'm going to miss lots of people out here. You've got Paul Temple, you've got Jose Figueira, you've Chris Milicic, Andy Head. There's so many people that have been involved previously. Ricky Herbert, who have reached up. They're so keen to support not just football in the country, but the development of football for the long term in the country. And that's what I certainly found when I went around the country, was whether they'd been involved before or they hadn't yet been involved, everybody was so keen, as long as there was someone reaching out to connect with them, to actually be part of something far greater than themselves. And again, I'll go back to, I think if there's a process put in place, which hopefully this has started, that can involve the greater football community and not just coaches, but those people coming through and those people that have been there. There's so much knowledge and good coaches that can add huge benefit to everything that goes on across both development pathways and the senior games. So I'm not too concerned that there's going to be a huge loss for me. And I've got my permanent residency, so I'd have no issue in coming back and working in the future, hopefully with the organisation or with those people that I've just spoken about.
I'm going to put you on the spot now because I want to see if you'll answer. But who are the best coaches and the best young coaches coming through in New Zealand?
I don't think that's a fair question to ask. The one thing I will say, I wrote to 10 of the ISPS coaches and asked if I could come into their environments. And I speak about that earlier, I think. And what I was able to see was, for me, there is no one way of doing something, and that's the beauty of coaching. And when I got around the 10 ISPS clubs in particular, it was so good to see different coaches, firstly, being keen to open up and let people in rather than work in isolation. And it was good to see the different ways that different people operate. And I think that's crucial for coaches, and I think it's crucial for certainly players, because it's one thing knowing how football is played in one country, but trying to gain an understanding of what else is going on, whether it be Australia or within Europe. Having those different experiences and exposures to coaches and to different systems and styles of play, I think helps bode well for players, and I think helps grow the mindset of coaches. So I wouldn't like to pick anybody out, but like I said, there are lots and lots, and I think we've seen that previously, and I've certainly seen a lot of that on the recent A license, especially that I started to work on at the start of this year.
Fair enough. Well, I guess we'll let him get away with that answer.
I just wanted you to name Wilkie, didn't we?
And so Darren Baisley has recently been named the New Zealand under-20s coach. Do you have any feelings about that appointment, or how did that sit with you? No feelings. Bays, I've never really worked with Darren. He was obviously I took his job when he left. So he's been across in the MLS, and he's been back in the A-League for a couple of months with the Newcastle Jets, and has made that decision to come back. So I'm sure he'll bring good value back into the national team setup. And again, I go back to leaving things in a better place. And I'd like to think, with everything that we've been able to build and develop from ground up with all of those people that I've mentioned previously, that Darren comes back into only the 20s role, but his role within the 23s and assistant All Whites role, with things in a far better place. Now they were in a good place when he left, but I think they're in a far greater place now across results, performances, and environment, that I'm sure he'll add, good value to. And just while we're on it, talking top office, how did the football department change at New Zealand Football after Andreas Heraf left, and when Andy Boyens was put in interim charge?
I think there was a lot of change at that time. There was a lot of change. Obviously, Andy went into the into the technical director role on an interim basis, I think, for nearly 12 months. And during that time, it was difficult to employ people in the vacant roles that we had. And that's kind of where some of the additional responsibilities for me come on board. And I think a couple of other people filled in and tried to make at what was a very difficult time for everybody, for obvious reasons. I think we had some real success stories come out of that, and that firstly come from the under-17s bronze medal that they went to the World Cup with Leon Burney. That was a really good success story that started getting things back on track. And then I think with the under-20s and what we did there, I think it helped maybe the perception of, it's been quite a bad 6 to 9 months, media-wise in particular, where now you've got a group of young girls that have gone and had huge success, and then we had a group of young men at under-20s level that really went on to add to that and make people proud again of the Fern and representing their country. So I think they've now started to fill those roles, and I hope that continues to now allow them to add value to everything that's going on in both the development space and the international level.
We're going to get to the next chapter soon. I'm just going to have a little break because we asked social media for questions for Des Buckingham, your Twitters, your Instagrams, your Facebook. So we've had a few come in. I'm just going to fire them at you. You can choose to play them however you choose. We'll see what we get. So this one from Gregor Griffin on Twitter. He says, does Des regret he didn't stick around and try and really make a go of it when he was signed by YBOP Federation? And in hindsight, was this where football started to go downhill for him?
I don't think I'll ever live that down in YBOP. So yeah, the kind of back to that, I hope, is my first job when I arrived here was as the football development manager for YBOP Football Federation. And within 11 weeks, Capital Football down in Wellington had approached me to come and take on the same role as football development manager down there, and I'd accepted. So I only actually spent 11 weeks in YBOP, but it was an 11 weeks where I firstly got abused in the city centre for driving a Wybop car through the Hamilton city, and then secondly, I was fortunate enough, as Seamus said at the start, to meet my first friend in New Zealand, and a guy that very much looked after me and still does up until this point. So, was it where football went downhill? I'd like to think not, but yeah, who knows? Who knows what could have happened for the space?
I've got one from friend of the show, D Singh. Des, do you play golf, and would you be interested in a tournament in Taupo?
I think if you want someone that can play golf, you need to see the assistant coach, Hiroshi Miyazawa. He seems to be going for the PGA tour, the amount of pictures and screenshots he keeps sending me. So no, I can't play golf. I'm no good at it. But yeah, Hiroshi Miyazawa is your man for golf in Taupo, but thank you for the invite.
Friend of the show and former sponsor of the show and bloody good referee, Chris Kerr, says, does Des have a plan to invest himself in New Zealand football in the future?
Chris is a good guy. Look, I've got permanent residency in New Zealand. I'd have absolutely no problem in coming back and either picking up where we left off or starting off a new journey in that kind of capacity, in that senior space, especially, whether that be in the short term or the long term. I don't think you can plan it, but I'd certainly have no issue at all coming back and living and working in New Zealand.
We've got one here from Cecile Martin, some relation to me, my sister. Is Seamus the best team manager? ? Lol.
Yeah, you laugh. I think we've had 3 or 4, I think, in the times. That's the one that we've had so much staff change in our environments, both 20s and 23s. It's been real interesting. So I think we had Carl Tinsley. I've had who else do we have? Someone messed this up. Wade Maloney, who was excellent in Australia. Seamus, you've come and gone and come again. And who was the other one? There was somebody else when I first arrived as well. So I think since you're on here, Seamus, and since I've spent as much time with you as I have, I think you'd certainly you'd be number one. So really enjoyed your company on most occasions.
Oh dear, that was tough. Okay, question from Dale Warburton. He says, what is the statistical probability that 3 players who played together 15 years ago would each happen to be the best choice to fill in one of 3 positions in a coaching setup?
No comment.
I like Dale's other question. What's it like being ridiculously good looking?
Jeez. What did you do at the 20s World Cup? You were rating managers, and you had that. Was it Norway? The other guy.
Oh, he was a good-looking guy, but yeah, you were definitely the best-looking coach at that World Cup. And
yeah, I don't know.
I'll also add, you were the best-looking assistant coach in India when we went there with the All Whites. That
we leave that there. I think we leave
that. A lot of you broke a lot of hearts when you went to India. But hey, maybe Mumbai City is an option in the future with the City Football Group. You never know.
Okay, last question from Soshmed, and then we'll move on, is from Sam Blackburn, who says, has Stephen Adams forgiven him yet? I've got no idea what this one's about.
That would be my first 4 or 5 weeks in Wellington. So I went to the Sport Wellington Awards with Capital Football, and Steve Adams was there. And I mean, I'm not a small guy, but I got a photo taken with Steve, and he was absolutely towered over me, and he'd just been awarded. I think he'd cleaned up at the awards. So I'd said to him, do you mind if I hold one of your awards? And I think before he actually said no, I'd already taken one and was posing for a photo with him, which is now plastered on the Sport Wellington Awards wall. But the funny thing is, there's 2 photos. There's one where he's smiling, and then there's the second one where he's actually looking at me and realised that I've got one of his trophies. And wasn't best pleased and quickly took it back off of me. So that was I think that's where Sam's going with that one.
Brilliant. All right, well let's start tracing your coaching journey now, because it's quite an interesting one. At 18 years of age, you started coaching, and then for 10 years you were at Oxford. But before that, you were a player. Now, were you not quite good enough to make it in the professional ranks? What sort of a player was Des Buckingham, and where did you fall short playing the game?
Yeah, not good enough to make the professional game. I think you summed it up there. There's no hard luck story here. Just was one day we had a change of manager. A guy called Ian Atkins came in at Oxford at the time when I was a youth player, and yeah, probably spent 2 or 3 weeks, and then just said, "Look, son, you're not going to get a contract here." So I quickly tried my luck elsewhere. Ended up being non-league. Didn't quite enjoy it as much as I had done my time at Oxford and then Reading prior to that. So decided to go down the coaching road, and that turned into 3 part-time jobs, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, and 1 in the evening, which I wouldn't say equated to a full-time role, certainly not a full-time wage, but sort of started me off on my coaching journey rather than a playing one.
Did coaching start kind of as a hobby to earn a bit of coin while you were studying, and it kind of snowballed into, this is really what I want to do? Or was it always, this is really what I want to do?
I think I fell into it initially. So I was fortunate. I had some excellent youth coaches, as I was a youth player at the time, but I had some excellent coaches that I worked under. So a guy called Mickey Lewis was infectious in terms of his mannerism. And I think I've probably taken a lot of his values and characteristics into my own coaching. And I think his way he dealt with people, the way he was able to put his points across, and again, of course, his football knowledge, he got me really intrigued into what coaching actually was. And from there, things just kind of happened. Those 3-time part-time roles turned into an opportunity at Oxford and Chilwell Valley College, which was a college that I'd studied at 3 years previous, where I ended up spending a 4-year spell as a full-time lecturer on a sports science diploma to 16 to 19-year-olds, whilst also continuing on a coaching journey, firstly with the college, and then secondly with Oxford United in the evenings. So yeah, it snowballed from there. And the good thing about working in the college space was they had a big government purse, which if they didn't spend the staff development money, it got returned to the government, and it got less the year after. So anything I put my hand up for or wanted to go on and do as a young coach, which was of course my coaching badges at the time, they not only did they support, but they financed. So I was able to go through a lot of qualifications and prime myself, I guess, for what was to come in later years, with firstly getting the jobs because they require you to have certain qualifications, but then that also allowed me the experience to go into those roles and learn and hopefully have success in later life.
And what part of the coaching attracted you to it? Was it strategically working out how to win games? Was it sort of leading men? Was it a camaraderie? Or was it a combination? Or was it, what separates you as a coach and what drives you?
Probably the same thing. I think I took from, I'll go back to Mickey Lewis again. I think it's about making people better people firstly, and then I think if you can make people better people, if you're going to delve into sport or whatever it may be, it was about trying to make people the best players they could be as well at whatever level, whether that was trying to help a 9, 10, 11-year-old through, or whether that was helping a senior professional, as I was at the time as a 29-year-old working under Chris Wilder at Oxford, trying to help them in whatever area it was, but it's probably helping people and stretching myself and being comfortable being uncomfortable. And I've been so fortunate to be in so many environments that have been hugely challenging and have exposed me to so much. But it's been a challenge, and it's been uncomfortable a lot of times. And that's been the excitement for me. Even I've had a first day here in Melbourne on Monday, and I don't know anybody here. I'm starting again, and that's uncomfortable. So yeah, again, without the experience, without the qualifications, without all of that stuff, you don't get these first opportunities, and certainly you don't get this chance to test yourself as a coach to see how good you can be at the same time.
So let's follow the journey. You do 10 years at Oxford, and then you decide you're looking for jobs, and one pops up at YBOT. Are you sort of scouring the world for the best place to go? How did that work out?
Yeah, so at the end, I said the end of the 10 years, towards the end of the 10 years, the English Football League and the Premier League, all the Football League clubs run academies. So academies programs from 9s through to generally 18s. Some will contain a 21s or a 23s within them as well. But they had an audit process that went on. And what that meant was there was an independent group of people that come to look at your youth development programs and rate them on a scale of category 1, 2, 3, or 4. And at the end of that review, I got taken aside by one of the assessors of the audit. And he actually said to me, he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, we've obviously seen your CV. We've seen your qualifications. You're doing a bit of everything at the moment." And I was 17s and 18s head coach. I was the MVQ and a tutor for the scholarship program for their education. I was head of coaching, so I was overseeing the coaching philosophy and development program across our age groups from 9s through to 16s. And at that same time, I was first team coach in the daytime. So he said, "Look, you're doing everything. What is it you want to specialize in? Where is it you want to go?" And when I thought about it, I hadn't actually had chance in my 10 years at Oxford to ever think about that. I was only 29. I was actually enjoying the journey. But he got me thinking, and I thought at the time something like an academy manager. So we had a guy called Les Taylor, who was the academy manager at Oxford at the time, who was 63, 64 years old, who I think was, if he was to ever leave, I see that as an opportunity, firstly, to stay in Oxford, where my family are all based, and secondly, to continue working at a club where I've obviously got a lot of close ties and know the players and staff. But I also realised my CV was coach heavy, and what I didn't have exposure to was budgets, management necessarily of people or boards. And those types of roles that I felt that if I was ever fortunate to get an interview for an academy manager role at a young age, that I would need, because that was certainly something missing. So I literally went looking for jobs that would give me access to those types of things. So it didn't matter to me the job title. That wasn't important to me. It was actually the job role, the job spec, and the roles and responsibilities that came with that. And as chance would have it, Owen Prosser had taken up a national team role as grassroots development manager for New Zealand football. I'd worked with Owen at Oxford with one of the age group teams for a 2-year period. And we spoke, and he said, "Well, actually, there's a federation over here looking for a football development manager." So he sent me the job spec, and I can't describe it. I read it, and it fitted every single criteria that I was looking for. And at a time where I was single, I had no mortgage, and it was an opportunity to get and go and experience a different way of working and living. I didn't know how many opportunities in my lifetime I'd get the chance to do that. So yeah, it was more a case if I go and it doesn't work, I can always come back. But if I don't go, I'll never know. And I think I'd always regret not taking up that opportunity. So I did. I applied for the job. I got the job and flew over and landed in Auckland and drove down in a hire car to Hamilton.
I can't believe you only lasted, 11 weeks in beautiful Hamilton before Wellington's turned your head.
Well, no, he wasn't even in Hamilton. He pitched himself up out at Raglan, which is even better.
I did. I went looking for houses. I went to Waihi first, and I pulled in, and there was a massive couple of acres around this house, and this person showed me around this house. And there was a goat in the back garden, and I said to him, "Well, who looks after the goat?" And he said, "You do, as part of the responsibility in the tenancy agreement for you signing the lease." And so I'd never owned an animal, let alone a goat. So that was pretty surreal. So I come away from Waihi, and just as sheer chance, ended up in Raglan on a Sunday afternoon, and got a good vibe on that place, and thought I could live here, and that's what I ended up doing, but for a short period of time.
Oh, there you go. But then, so you pitch up down in Wellington, initially with Capital, with the Federation down there. But then how did the Phoenix opportunity come about?
Sheer chance, again. So I had a meeting as part of my football development manager role with Capital with Sean Gill at the Phoenix. And we were talking about, I can't even tell you what we were talking about, but we were meeting about something for Capital. And he made a point to me, and I said, "Well, I can do that." And he said, "Well, send me your CV." So I'd sent him, I got back to Capital, I'd spoke to Richard Reed, who was the CEO and still is. And within 30 minutes of me sending my CV, Ernie Merrick rang me and said, "Can you come in?" So this was Monday. "Can you come in on Wednesday to have a chat?" I said, "Yeah." So I did. I went in on Wednesday, And what I didn't realise, he'd actually invited me into a staff meeting. So I've walked in and you've got all the staff who I had no idea, I'd never met before. And I sat in this staff meeting. Then he introduced me and then pulled me into his office and said, is everything on your CV legitimate? Is it true? And I said, yeah. I said, you can check it if you like. And as crazy as it was, I left there on the Wednesday afternoon with Ernie telling me that I was getting on a plane on Friday to join the Phoenix staffing group to go and play Melbourne Victory away at the weekend. So, yeah, pretty surreal. And the support that Capital Football put behind that, and Richard Reed in particular, was huge for me at that time, because I'd left the football environment, which I'd become used to at Oxford. And I'd spent a year probably outside of coaching and outside of that game because I wanted those experiences of managing people, boards and budgets. But I started to miss the football coaching side of things. So for Capital to allow me to take up that opportunity was huge. And we went to Melbourne and we beat the Victory 3-2. And yeah, never looked back from there really.
Until Ernie left, and then was it about 6 games to go, and the opportunity presented itself to take the team with Chris Greenacre. Was that kind of a dream come true? Was that like an opportunity that you couldn't have imagined coming? And you talk me through that period.
Yeah, pretty surreal. So I go back to, you try and prepare yourself. You know, you want to coach, again, I do. I know I want to try and coach at the highest level I possibly can. And I don't know what that means. But what I do know is you can't look too far ahead, especially in football, because things change very quickly. But all you can do is try and do the best job you can in the job you're currently in. And I felt that we tried to do that whilst working with Ernie. But yeah, it was only the 8th game into the season that when Ernie stood down. So it was still over 2/3 of the season to still play. So we were away in Adelaide at the time, and Ernie announced to the playing group that he'd made a decision to step away, which was a surprise, both to the players and to the staff. And then the next day, Chris and myself were put in interim charge while the club decided what way they wanted to go forwards or move forwards with what was next. And only by I'd done my pro license a year earlier, and I ended up taking on the head coach role. And I was able to do that because I had my pro license. And the one thing I'll go back to, I think the qualifications are one thing. I think you have to, obviously, if you want to work in most professions, you need to get a certain level of qualification. But a qualification doesn't necessarily mean you're good at what you do. But by getting those qualifications prior to the Phoenix, it allowed me opportunities to experience so many different environments, so many, and work under so many good coaches and work with so many good players. So I think that I tried to position myself again. If something like that was to come up, you were trying to be as ready for it as you can. Of course, you never know what you need until you get there. And I'm certainly it's the same now, the same as I was there. I'm 35 now. I was 31 at the time that came about. And I wasn't in a rush to be a head coach, because football's a long game. And I think if you take on the wrong job at the wrong time, it can burn you and take a long time to recover from. So, but what it did do is it exposed me to lots of other things that to be a head coach that I needed to be aware of. And it gave me, again, those opportunities to work with boards, which is what the role at Capital and YBOP had allowed me to do, budgets and the like. And yeah, Chris and me continued to work with the team for the next 2/3 of the season. We took the team off the bottom of the table, and we ended up putting a points tally together that if the season would have started when we took over, you know, we took over at a time where we'd lost 6 out of the first 8 games. But if the season would have started when we took over, we'd have actually made the playoffs on the points that we picked up with everyone else compared to everybody else. So to get that kind of a change without changing the playing group or changing the staff that we had, I felt was a good first test, I suppose, as a head coach. And was pretty happy with the way that worked out in the end, although disappointing, of course, to lose a great mentor in Ernie.
We had Jonathan Gould on a couple of weeks ago, who spoke about his time at West Bromwich Albion. And I don't know whether it was tongue-in-cheek or in jest, but he sort of indicated that the chairman's objective was to finish 17th in the Premier League. one spot above the relegation. What are the realities like of working within, I don't want to be disrespectful, like a mid-range Premier League club? Like, having worked at Stoke City, is that kind of the mentality around the club, that 17th is the absolute kind of minimum, or is it like, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it's pretty. I've used the word surreal already, but it is pretty. I drove in on my first day, and I knew already that the club itself obviously was a Premier League club. With that, and they've been a Premier League club at that time for a long period of time, and being in the Premier League financially is a huge windfall for those clubs. And the longer you're in it, of course, the more you can kind of distance yourself from those other teams in the other leagues, because just financially you get so much more. And to give you an example, the Academy was a Category 1 club, so it had been audited, and the Category 1 club meant that the club spent, I think it's £3.5 million a year just on their academy, so 7 million New Zealand dollars roughly a year on their academy program. And what comes with that is facilities, is staff, is games programs. So it's such a huge thing to be part of, firstly, the Premier League, and secondly, to be a Category 1 club and what comes with that. So regardless for me where they finished, just by staying in the Premier League, it has its huge benefits. I wasn't too privy to what the targets were when I went in, especially from a first team point of view. But again, the season didn't start particularly well, and unfortunately, Mark Hughes was relieved of his duties around Christmas, and Paul Lambert coming in, the club ended up getting relegated that season, which was hugely disappointing to see, because they had some really good people there and good players. So yeah, I'm not sure. Again, without a comparable, it's difficult to say. But again, all I can say is what being in the Premier League certainly brings a lot of additional benefits than maybe being in the Championship, the step down.
Well, I've got one for you. Why the hell did you leave a program that spends 7 million New Zealand dollars to come back to New Zealand and run an under-20 program that gives you $5,000 to run a camp? That seems like lunacy. How did you end up leaving Stoke and coming back to New Zealand?
Yeah, so I'd kept an eye. I didn't necessarily want to leave the first time. Like I said, I'd made the decision to come across, and I'd actually built a life for myself in Wellington at that time. But Dario Kalazic come in, and despite me having a year left on my contract, said he was going to bring an assistant coach in Rado Vidicic with him. And he didn't see myself or Chris, I can only speak for me, being his assistant coach and coaching on the grass. He said my role would be more analysis, which again, that wasn't what I wanted to do, and wasn't going to help me be a better coach. So I didn't, although I didn't want to leave, I needed to still try and get better. And to get better, unfortunately, at that time, the only role was outside of the country. But what I did do while I was away, you keep in touch with people anyway, and you keep an eye on what was going on. I'd seen that the All Whites had unfortunately missed out to Peru on the World Cup. And with that come a whole load of changes. And when the role came up with the 20s, it was certainly one with the time that I'd spent with those players, and understand, as an English coach, I'll be honest, coming as an English coach, taking time to understand the country, taking time to understand the way things work, understand clubs, the unique culture which is New Zealand and football in New Zealand, and hopefully having shown that I can coach to a certain level, I felt that I could come back and offer something that I felt New Zealand players could really showcase themselves the way we did on the world stage. And I felt I could come back and try and lead that, firstly through qualification, and then secondly at the World Cup. And to be able to do that in a country where, I've gone for residency for a reason. I wanted to, I would love to continue living in New Zealand, but I felt that, I don't know, Seamus, to be honest. It felt right, is the only thing I can say. I felt that I could come back, hopefully add some huge value, and help shape how football on the international stage, especially at age group level, could continue to run both now and hopefully in the future.
We said we were going to take you back to Poland, and I want to get there via Sarpreet Singh, because my notes suggest, and I don't actually remember this, but you were the one who gave him his A-League debut. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did. I brought him on against Melbourne City, of all teams, and we were 3-1 down at the time, and we ended up losing the game 5-1. But yeah, he did. I give him his debut. And do you know what? He probably should have had his debut a couple of games or months before, because he'd been really impressive in what was the ISPS or ASB Premiership at that time.
So you got eyes on him early. You gave him his debut. You went to Poland. He started in the World Cup, and he got picked up from as a result of that with Bayern Munich. How high is his ceiling? How good can he be? Where can he get to? And how early upon seeing him did you realize that?
Yeah, I don't like to guess where players can go. I think it's the first thing would be, I mean, we went to that 20s World Cup with 3 professional players on professional contracts out of 21. And when you're looking now at where those players are, there's of that starting 11, pretty much all of them have signed professional contracts post that World Cup. And I'll tell you now, and Seamus, feel free to correct me here, I think the way we played, the way we went about what we did, the way we set up, allowed players to really showcase themselves and show what they're capable of doing. And I think it surprised the players, firstly, because we had to get them to a stage where they could truly believe that they could play that way. And once they were in, I mean, you see the results of that. But what it also did was drag so many scouts to our games. It was quite funny. We only had 5 against the game against Honduras. And that doubled and doubled and doubled. And I think there was 40 to 50 scouts in the stands against Colombia to watch our players because they weren't on the radar prior. And Sarpreet, as far as I'm told, and the communication we certainly had at that World Cup, wasn't on Bayern's radar at that time. So it's been a huge shot window, not just for Sarpreet, but for those other players. And I now know that, I mean, I'm contacted most weeks about New Zealand players because there's people now looking this side of the world to try and see what, you know, players are here to take into Europe. And so that was that. And then Sarpreet's had an unbelievable rise. To see him go from what was a 20s World Cup, and 12 months later, he's not only signed at one of the biggest clubs, if not the biggest club in Europe, but he's also part of a team that's won the Bundesliga. He's made his Bundesliga debut. And, you know, although he didn't take the field in the finals, he's part of a team that's won the Champions League as well. That is a huge, huge move for anybody. And I think he's kind of trailblazing the way, hopefully for others to come in, to follow in his footsteps.
But before the team, or we got to Poland, we had to navigate Oceania, and Sarpreet was one of a number of players that wasn't available. Can you reflect on your initial experiences in Oceania competition? So you'd been to New Zealand, you'd been with the federations, you'd been at the Phoenix, you'd been in the A-League, you've travelled to Australia every second week, whatever it is. Oceania qualifiers present some kind of different challenges. Was it a bit of a rude awakening for you when we landed in Tahiti?
I think I know where you're going with this. It wasn't my first time in the islands. I mean, when the Phoenix, we played Fiji away, so I'd had a rough experience, I suppose, or a rough idea of what to expect. But what we had prior to, I don't know if you remember, Seamus, but prior to that actual tour, we had huge player unavailability. So we had players withdraw themselves. We had clubs withdraw their players. And, you know, same thing. We ended up going there with a side that was, we put together, I think we were still bringing players in on the Sunday before we left on the Wednesday.
You didn't have an assistant coach, did you?
No, I didn't. No, Chris Greenacre had been, had to commit himself to the Phoenix, so it meant him coming away. So, yeah, Mia's relationship of mine, I hadn't met Mia properly prior to maybe a week before going to Tahiti. So there was a lot of change. There was a lot of player unavailability. But when we arrived into Tahiti, I think my first experience was watching. We turned up to the training fields and was watching you walk around and pick up dog poo off of the fields, and the lines weren't marked out the way simply weren't marked out. And then halfway through the session, there was a ball went into the bush, and we went to retrieve it, and there was a guy with a notepad taking notes on our setup. So it was a pretty first, it was a pretty funny first experience of the island. But again, it was good because not only did we go on to win all of our games and qualify to the World Cup, but we went on to win the Oceania Championship at our first attempt. And again, I think by sheer, I suppose, luck or whatever you want to define it as being, our culture stuff probably started there without realizing how or what we were going to end up doing because of the people we brought with us and the way we kind of structured things. And that played a huge part in that because we had some real tight games and didn't really have too much time with the players to implement a playing style at that point.
We're just going to bounce around all over the show now, but I want to just stick in Poland for a little bit because I feel like we just need to give that a little bit more time because that group is so special. It seems like there's some players who are really just at the beginning of coming out. Joe Bell, Kakachi, Sarpreet. Are we going to look back on that group in 10 years and say, are there others in there and say, wow, like I know we got unlucky by bowing out in that penalty shootout, but wow, what a group we had then.
It's a golden generation, isn't it? Like Portugal talk about golden generation of 89 or whatever that won the Under-20 World Cup, Figo and all them. Surely this group is New Zealand's golden generation.
Yeah, it's funny. I've had a few people say that, and I think we need to look at the squads that have previously gone. So even if you go back to when the Under-20s hosted, when we hosted it, I've got to stop saying we now. Sorry. When New Zealand hosted, yeah, I know.
Come back.
When New Zealand hosted it in 2015, so there was a 12-month preparation period. I think if you remember, the Wanderers had a team in the actual senior league in New Zealand where they were able to train with Darren Baisley and pretty much spend 12 months preparing for that tournament. And we're talking about players like Bill Tuoloma, Ollie Sale, Alex Rufer, Matt Redenton, Monty Patterson, Tiatai Hudson Wahongi, Noah Billingsley, Clayton Lewis, Moses Dyer, Declan Wynn. So that's a good squad. That's a very good squad of players at under-20. And then fast forward to 2017, you've got players like Hunter Ashworth, James McGarry, Logan Rogerson, Maya Bevan, Jack Henry Sinclair, Henry Cameron, as well as, the likes of Clayton, Michael Wood. You even had a young Sarpreet Singh, Callum McCow, Dane Ingham and Joe Ballin there. So I think you just need to be careful when we throw it around saying it's the golden generation, because I think we have good players, and I think we've had good players in previous campaigns. And what I do think is across more than maybe just the 20s, what I'm really convinced around is New Zealand football in particular, and now certainly the 23s and senior space, have got such a wide base to now call upon. From, if you were to say 2015, 2017, and our 2019 campaign, as well as others coming through now. It's a hugely talented group of players across the spectrum. So yes, it was a very good group we took away. But again, compare them to previous groups and where those players were playing at that time. It's hard to compare, but there were very good players across those previous two campaigns as well.
I've got my own answer to this because I was there, but was there a moment in the lead up to Poland or while we were in Poland when you thought, fuck me, this is a good group, we're going to go okay here?
Yes, but prior to that, I mean, I go back to we talk about limited resource. We were told that we could only run 2 camps leading into that World Cup, and we weren't allowed to spend more than $5,000 per camp to do that. And to give you an idea of our overall budget, I met with our England under-20s head coach, and our overall budget, we operated on a 5% comparable budget to them. So that was,
they didn't qualify either.
They didn't qualify. Norway knocked them out. And we ended up going on to beat Norway. So that was, to be able to do what we did with what we had available to us to lead into that event was pretty special. And I keep coming back to this culture that really enhanced team performance on and off the field. But yes, there was a moment, and for me, it was the 2 friendlies. We played 2 friendlies before people see the Honduras game, so nobody see the 2 friendlies.